The table of hydrogens. At the place where we are situated within the limits of our ordinary powers and capacities, hydrogen 6 is irresolvable, and we can take it therefore as hydrogen 1, the next hydrogen 12 as hydrogen 6. Reducing all the hydrogens that follow by 2, we obtain a scale from hydrogen 1 to hydrogen 6144. However, hydrogen 6 is nevertheless still irresolvable for us, we can therefore also take it as hydrogen 1, and reduce all the following values again by 2. The scale obtained in this way, from 1 to 3072, can serve us for the study of man. All matter, from hydrogen 6 to hydrogen 3072, are to be found and play a part in the human organism. Each of these hydrogens includes a large group of chemical substances known to us, linked together by some function in connection with our organism. In other words, it must not be forgotten that the term hydrogen has very wide meaning. Any simple element is a hydrogen of a certain density, but any combination of elements that possess a definite function, either in the world or in the human organism, is also a hydrogen. This kind of definition of matter enables us to classify them in the order of their relation to life, and to the functions of our organism. So let us begin with hydrogen 768. This hydrogen is defined as food. In other words, hydrogen 768 includes all substances that can serve as food for man. Substances that cannot serve as food, such as a piece of wood, refer to hydrogen 1536. A piece of iron to hydrogen 3072. On the other hand, a thin matter with poor nutritive properties will be nearer to hydrogen 384. Hydrogen 384 can be defined as water. Hydrogen 192 would then be the air of our atmosphere that we breathe. Hydrogen 96 is represented by rarefied gases that humans cannot breathe, but which nonetheless play a very important part in our lives, and further, this is the matter of animal magnetism, of emanations from the human body, of rays, hormones, pheromones, endorphins, serotonin, vitamins, and so on. In other words, with hydrogen 96 ends what is called matter, or what can be regarded as matter by our physics and chemistry. Hydrogen 96 also includes matters that are almost imperceptible to our chemistry, or perceptible only by their traces and results, often merely presumed by some and denied by others. To this group belong our atomic and subatomic particles, protons, neutrons and electrons. Hydrogens 48, 24, 12 and 6 are matters unknown to physics and chemistry. Matters of our psychic and spiritual life on different levels. Altogether, in examining the table of hydrogens, it must always be remembered that each hydrogen of this table includes an enormous number of different substances, connected together by one and the same function in our organism, and representing a definite cosmic group. Hydrogen 12 corresponds to the hydrogen of chemistry, atomic weight 1. Carbon, nitrogen and oxygen, of chemistry, have the atomic weights of 12, 14 and 16. In addition, it is possible to point out in the table of atomic weights, elements that correspond to certain hydrogens, that is, elements whose atomic weights stand almost in the correct octave ratio to one another. Hence, for example, hydrogen 24 corresponds to fluorine, F1, atomic weight of 19. Hydrogen 48 corresponds to chlorine, C1, atomic weight of 35.5. Hydrogen 96 corresponds to bromine, Br, atomic weight of 80. Hydrogen 192 corresponds to iodine, I, atomic weight of 127. The atomic weights of these elements stand in the ratio of an octave to one another. In other words, the atomic weight of one of them is almost twice as much as the atomic weight of another. The slight inexactitude that is the incomplete octave relationship is brought about by the fact that ordinary chemistry does not take into consideration all of the properties of a substance, namely, it does not take into consideration its cosmic properties. The chemistry of which we speak studies matter on a different basis from ordinary chemistry, and takes into consideration not only the chemical and physical, but also the psychic and cosmic properties of matter. This chemistry or alchemy regards matter first of all from the point of view of its function, which determines its place in the universe, its relation to other matters, and then from the point of view of its relation to man's functions. The term an atom of a substance is used to describe a certain small quantity of any given substance that retains all of its chemical, cosmic and psychic properties. Because in addition to its cosmic properties, every substance also possesses psychic properties. That is, a certain degree of intelligence. The concept atom may therefore refer not only to elements but also to all compound matters, possessing definite functions in the universe or in the life of man. There can be an atom of water, an atom of air, that is atmospheric air suitable for man's respiration. An atom of bread, an atom of meat and so on. An atom of water will in this case be 1/10 of a cubic millimeter of water, taken at a certain temperature by a special thermometer. This will be a tiny drop of water that under certain conditions can be seen with the naked eye. This atom is the smallest quantity of water that retains all the properties of water. On further division, some of these properties disappear, that is to say, it will not be water, but something approaching the gaseous state of water such as steam, which does not differ chemically in any way from water in a liquid state, but possesses different functions and therefore different cosmic and psychic properties. The table of hydrogens makes it possible to examine all substances making up man's organism, from the point of view of their relation to different planes of the universe. As every function of man is a result of the action of definite substances, and as each substance is connected with a definite plane in the universe, this fact enables us to establish the relation between man's functions and the planes of the universe. The table can then be expanded, and aside from the 3 scales of hydrogen spoken of previously, the reduction may be taken further into 12 scales. Take for example the 5th scale. The absolute here is hydrogen 96, where fire can serve as an example of hydrogen 96. Fire then in this instance is the absolute for a piece of wood. Take then the 7th scale. Here the absolute is hydrogen 384, where water can serve as an example of hydrogen 384. Water then for this example will be the absolute for a lump of sugar. It should be pointed out though that the 3 octaves of radiation and the table of hydrogens derived from them can be a stumbling block to clear understanding for some time. The fundamental and most essential principles of the transition of the triads, and the structure of matter, can only be understood later and will be spoken of again. We want to do, but in everything we do we are tied and limited by the amount of energy produced by our organism. Every function, every state, every action, every thought and every emotion requires a certain amount of energy, a certain definite substance. We come to the conclusion that we must remember ourselves. However, we can only remember ourselves if we have in us the energy for self-remembering. We can study something, understand or feel something, only if we have the energy for understanding, feeling and studying. What then is a person to do when they begin to realize that they have insufficient energy to attain the aims that they have set before themselves? The answer to this is that every normal human being has enough energy to begin work on themselves. Thereafter it is only necessary to learn how to save the greater part of the energy we possess for useful work, instead of wasting it unproductively. Energy is spent primarily on unnecessary and unpleasant emotions, on the expectation of unpleasant things, both possible and impossible, on bad moods, on unnecessary haste, nervousness, irritability, imagination, daydreaming, fantasy and so on. Energy is wasted on the wrong work of centers, on unnecessary tension of the muscles out of all proportion to the work that they produce, on perpetual chatter that absorbs an enormous amount of energy, on the interest continually taken in things happening around us, or in other people, and having in fact no interest whatsoever, on the constant waste of the force of attention and so on. In beginning to struggle with all of these habitual sides of life, a person saves an enormous amount of energy, and with the help of this energy they can easily begin the work of self-study and self-perfection. Further on, however, the problem becomes more difficult. Having to a certain extent balanced their machine, and ascertained for themselves that it produces much more energy than they had first expected, a person however comes to the conclusion that this energy is not enough, and that if they wish to continue this work, they must increase the amount of energy produced. The study of the working of the human organism shows this to be quite possible. The human organism represents a chemical factory, planned for the possibility of substantial output. However, in the ordinary conditions of life, the output of this factory never reaches its full production potential, because only a small part of the machinery is used, which produces only that quantity of material necessary to maintain its own existence. Factory work of this kind is obviously uneconomic. The factory actually produces no surplus because all of its machinery, all of its elaborate equipment, actually serves no purpose at all, in that it maintains only with difficulty its own existence. The work of this factory consists of transforming one kind of matter into another, namely the coarser matters in the cosmic sense, into finer ones. The factory receives as raw material from the outer world a number of coarse hydrogens, then transforms them into finer hydrogens by means of a whole series of alchemical processes. However, in the ordinary conditions of life, the production by the human factory of the finer hydrogens that we are particularly interested in, from the point of view of the possibility of higher states of consciousness, and the work of higher centers, is insufficient, and they are all wasted on the maintenance of the factory itself. If we could however succeed in bringing the production up to the maximum, we would then begin to save these fine hydrogens. Then the whole of the body, all of the tissues and all of its cells would become saturated with these fine hydrogens, which could then gradually settle in them, crystallizing in a special way. This crystallization of the fine hydrogens would in time bring the whole organism onto a higher level, and onto a higher plane of being. This, however, cannot happen in the ordinary conditions of life, because the factory expends all that it produces. Learn to separate the fine from the coarse. This principle from the Emerald Tablets of Hermes Trismegistus refers to the work of the human factory. If a person learns to separate the fine from the coarse, that is, if they bring production of the fine hydrogens to their maximum, they will then, by this very fact, create for themselves the possibility of inner growth that can be brought about by no other means. Inner growth, the growth of the inner bodies of man, the astral, the mental, and so on, is a material process completely analogous to the growth of the physical body. In order to grow, a child must have good food. Its organism must be in a healthy condition to prepare from this food the material necessary for tissue growth. The same thing is required for the growth of the astral body. Out of the various kinds of food entering it, the organism must produce the substances necessary for the growth of an astral body. Furthermore, the astral body requires for its growth the same substances as those necessary to maintain the physical body, only in much greater quantities. If the physical organism begins to produce a sufficient quantity of these fine substances, and the astral body within it becomes formed, then this astral organism will require for its maintenance less of these substances than it required during development. The surplus of these substances can then be used for the formation and growth of the mental body, that can then grow with the help of the same substances that feed the astral body. The growth of the mental body will, however, require more of these substances than the growth and feeding of the astral body. The surplus of the substances left over from the feeding of the mental body will then go to the growth of the fourth body. But in all cases the surplus will have to be substantial. All the fine substances necessary for the growth and feeding of higher bodies must be produced within our physical organism, and that physical organism is able to produce them, provided that the human factory is working properly and economically. All of the substances necessary for the maintenance of life in our organism, for psychic work, for the higher functions of consciousness, and the growth of higher bodies are produced by the organism from food that enters from the outside. The human organism receives three kinds of food for this purpose. The ordinary food that we eat, the air we breathe, our impressions. It is not difficult to agree that air is a kind of food for the organism. However, in what way impressions can be food may appear at first difficult to understand. We must, however, remember that with every external impression, whether it takes the form of sound, vision, touch, or smell, we receive from outside a certain amount of energy, a certain number of vibrations. This energy that enters our organism from outside is a form of food or sustenance just like any other. Furthermore, as previously noted, energy cannot be transmitted without matter. If an external impression brings external energy with it into the organism, this means that external matter also enters, which feeds the organism in the fullest meaning of the term. For its normal existence, an organism must receive all three kinds of food, that is, physical food, air, and impressions. Our organism cannot exist on one or even on two kinds of food, all three are required. However, the relation of these foods to one another, and their significance for the organism are not the same. An organism can exist for a comparatively long time without a supply of fresh physical food. Cases of starvation, fasting, or hunger strike are known that lasted for over 60 days, where the organism lost none of its vitality and recovered very quickly as soon as it began to take in food once again. Of course, starvation of this kind cannot be considered as complete, since in all cases of such artificial starvation, people have continued to take water. Nevertheless, even without water a person can live without food for up to 14 days. Without air we can exist only for a few minutes, not more than 2 or 3, and as a rule a person dies after being without air for more than around 9 minutes. Without impressions one cannot live a single moment. If the flow of impressions were to be stopped in some way, or if our organism were deprived of its capacity to receive impressions, then it would immediately die. The flow of impressions coming to us from outside is like a driving belt communicating motion. The principal motor for us is nature, our surrounding world. Nature transmits to us through our impressions, the energy by which we live and move, it's how we have our being. If the inflow of this energy is arrested, then our machine will immediately stop working. Thus, of the three kinds of food the most important for us is impressions, although it stands to reason obviously that a person cannot exist for long on impressions alone. Impressions and air enable us to exist a little longer. Impressions, air, and physical food enable an organism to live to the end of its normal term, to produce the substances necessary not only for the maintenance of its own life, but also for the creation and growth of higher bodies.